40,000 Athenian soldiers had until dawn to break the siege and escape, or they would all die. The year was 413 BC, September, somewhere inland from the city of Syracuse in Sicily. The Athenians were trapped, surrounded on all sides by the Syracusan army. No food, no water, no escape route. 2 days ago, they had been besieging Syracuse. Now, they were the ones trapped, the ones running out of time. As night fell, the Athenian generals gathered their officers, Nicias and Demosthenes, two of Athens' most experienced commanders. They explained the situation. The Syracusans had them surrounded, completely. If the Athenians stayed where they were, they would starve within days. If they tried to fight their way out in daylight, they would be slaughtered in open ground. There was one option, one chance. March tonight, through the darkness, cover 40 miles before sunrise, reach defensible ground before the Syracusans could see them in daylight. If they made it, they might survive. If they were caught at dawn in open ground, 40,000 men would die. The officers understood. This was not a battle plan. This was a desperate escape attempt. Most of them would probably not survive the night, but staying meant certain death. At least this way, some might make it. The order was given. Prepare to move. Leave the wounded who cannot walk. Leave the equipment that makes noise. Carry only weapons and whatever water you have. Move silently. Move fast. Do not stop for anything. They had maybe 8 hours until sunrise. 8 hours to cover impossible distance through unfamiliar terrain in complete darkness while being hunted by an enemy that knew the land. 40,000 men. One night. Dawn meant death. As the last light faded from the sky, the Athenian army began to move into darkness, into what would become one of the worst military disasters in history. But here's where it gets crazy. 2 years earlier, these same men had sailed to Sicily as conquerors. Athens in 415 BC was at the height of its power, the dominant naval force in the Greek world, wealthy from tribute paid by allied cities, confident after decades of success. But Athens was also at war. The Peloponnesian War against Sparta had been grinding on for years. Neither side could break the other. Stalemate on land, stalemate at sea. The war was expensive, draining. The Athenian assembly debated what to do next. Some argued for caution, consolidate, defend what they had. Others argued for expansion, strike somewhere unexpected, win decisively, end the war from a position of total dominance. The expansionists won. The target was Sicily, specifically Syracuse, the largest and wealthiest Greek city on the island. If Athens conquered Syracuse, they would control Sicily. Control Sicily, and they would dominate the Western Mediterranean. The wealth from Sicily would fund the war against Sparta, maybe even end it. The assembly approved the expedition, not a small raid, a full invasion force, 134 warships, the core of the Athenian navy, 40,000 men, hoplites in heavy armor, light infantry, archers, slingers, cavalry, thousands of rowers to power the ships, supply vessels, siege equipment. It was the largest military operation Athens had ever launched, the largest Greek expedition anyone had seen in a generation. The docks at Piraeus were packed with ships. The entire city came out to watch them leave. The commanders promised victory by winter. Syracuse was powerful, but Athens was bringing overwhelming force. The city would see the Athenian fleet and surrender, or they would besiege it for a few months and starve it out. Either way, Athens would win. The fleet sailed in the summer of 415 BC. The journey took weeks. When they finally reached Sicily, the sight was impressive. 134 warships entering Syracuse's harbor, 40,000 men disembarking, the largest invasion force Sicily had ever seen. The Syracusans watched from their walls. They did not surrender. The Athenians landed, set up camp, began the siege. They built walls around the city, standard procedure, cut off supplies, wait for hunger to do the work. Syracuse would fall. It was just a matter of time. Weeks passed. Syracuse did not surrender. The Athenians kept building. More walls, more fortifications, cutting off more supply routes. The Syracusans responded by building their own walls, counter walls, blocking Athenian progress. Small skirmishes broke out. Men died. Neither side gained much ground. Months passed. Summer turned to autumn. Autumn turned to winter. The Athenians were still outside Syracuse, still building walls, still waiting. Winter in Sicily was cold, wet. The Athenian camp turned to mud. Supplies from Athens took weeks to arrive. Ships had to sail hundreds of miles. Men got sick. Some died from disease. More died in the constant skirmishes with Syracusan raiders. The siege dragged into 414 BC. The commanders sent messages back to Athens. We need more men, more supplies, more ships. This is taking longer than expected. Athens sent reinforcements, not enough to end the siege quickly, just enough to keep it going. The commitment kept growing. Tens of thousands of men became the minimum needed just to hold the position. Casualties from disease and skirmishes were replaced with fresh troops from Athens. The cycle continued. This is where it gets insane. The siege continued through 414 BC. The Athenians were making progress, slowly. Their walls were extending. Syracuse's supply lines were being cut. The city was being squeezed. But Syracuse was desperate. They sent urgent messages to Sparta, Athens' great enemy. The message was simple. If Syracuse falls, Athens will be unstoppable. Help us now, or face Athens alone later. Sparta debated. Syracuse was far away. Greek cities in Sicily were supposed to handle their own problems. But the argument was persuasive. Athens controlling Sicily was unacceptable. Sparta sent help. A general named Gylippus, experienced, respected. He arrived with reinforcements, not a huge force, just a few thousand men. But they were Spartans. They knew how to fight. Gylippus reached Syracuse in the autumn of 414 BC. He assessed the situation immediately. The Athenians had the advantage, but not overwhelming strength. They were spread thin, trying to wall off an entire city while defending their own positions. Vulnerable. Gylippus reorganized the Syracusan defense, changed tactics. Instead of staying behind walls, he launched counterattacks, hit the Athenians where they were weakest, broke through siege lines, destroyed Athenian fortifications. The Athenians responded, rebuilt, counterattacked. But the momentum had shifted. They were no longer slowly winning. Now they were just holding position. The siege that was supposed to last months was entering its second year. Athens sent more reinforcements, another fleet, another 5,000 men, more supplies, more money. The commitment was enormous now, too much invested to withdraw. The siege ground into 413 BC, 2 years since the invasion began. The Athenians had built miles of walls, lost thousands of men to combat and disease, spent a fortune, and Syracuse was still standing. Then Syracuse made a strategic decision. They had been fighting on land, losing slowly, but Athens had one overwhelming advantage: their navy. Athenian ships controlled the harbor, could resupply freely, could retreat by sea if the land siege failed. The navy was Athens' escape route. Syracuse decided to challenge that. They built more warships, trained new crews, reinforced their fleet. Then they challenged Athens to a naval battle. Inside Syracuse's own harbor, confined waters. No room for the Athenians to maneuver freely. No room to use their superior naval tactics. The Athenian commanders accepted. They had to. If they refused, it would look like weakness. And they were confident. Athens had the best navy in Greece. Syracuse was a land power. This would be an easy victory at sea. The battle began in the summer of 413 BC, inside the harbor. Confined space. 130 Athenian warships against a similar number of Syracusan ships. The Athenians expected to win quickly. They did not. The Syracusans had reinforced their ships, made them heavier, stronger. When Athenian ships tried to ram them, the Syracusan ships held, then counterattacked, ramming back, boarding, close combat on the decks. The battle turned into chaos. Ships crushing together, no room to retreat, no room to maneuver, just brutal close-quarters fighting. Hours of it. The Athenians started losing ships, sinking, captured, burning. They could not disengage, trapped in the confined harbor. The Syracusan fleet was all around them. By the time the battle ended, the Athenian fleet was destroyed, not defeated, destroyed. Ships at the bottom of the harbor, crews dead or captured. The survivors retreated to shore. What was left of the fleet could not sail, could not fight, could not evacuate anyone. The psychological impact was catastrophic. Athens was a naval power. The navy was everything. Athenian identity was built on controlling the sea. And in one afternoon, that fleet was gone. Tens of thousands of Athenian soldiers sat on land in Sicily. No ships to evacuate them, no fleet to resupply them, no way home. The Syracusan army saw the opportunity immediately. For 2 years, they had been on the defensive. Now, the Athenians were vulnerable. Stranded, the Syracusans mobilized every available soldier. Every allied city sent troops. They assembled an army and moved out. The Athenian generals understood what was coming. They ordered an immediate retreat, inland, away from the coast, away from the destroyed harbor. Find defensible ground, regroup. The entire army packed up and moved, but they were slow, wounded from 2 years of fighting, exhausted, demoralized, carrying what supplies they could. The Syracusans followed, not attacking yet, just following, staying close, blocking roads, cutting off paths, herding the Athenians away from any possible escape route. For several days, the Athenians marched. The Syracusans shadowed them. Then the Syracusans moved ahead, cut them off, circled around. Within a week, the Athenian army was surrounded, completely surrounded. Syracusan forces on all sides, every direction blocked, no way out, no reinforcements coming from Athens, no supplies getting through, no water sources accessible. The Athenians set up a defensive camp. What else could they do? They had food for maybe a few days, water for less. The wounded from 2 years of siege warfare lay in the camp, thousands of them, no medical supplies, no way to move them, just suffering. The Syracusans did not attack, they did not need to, they just waited, set up their own camps, blocked every route. The Athenians would starve within days. Thirst would kill them even faster. Why risk casualties when time would do the work? The Athenian generals called a council, Nicias and Demosthenes, both experienced commanders. Both understood exactly how bad this was. They discussed options. Surrender. But the Syracusans would execute them. No question. After 2 years of siege, after thousands of Syracusan dead, there would be no mercy for the Athenian commanders. Stay and fight. But tens of thousands of infantry in a defensive camp surrounded by a mobile army. The Syracusans could just wait. Let starvation do the work. Try to fight their way out in daylight. March through open ground, but the Syracusan cavalry would massacre them. Infantry in the open against cavalry. It would be a slaughter. One option remained. One nobody wanted to say out loud because everyone knew how dangerous it was. Night. March at night. Use darkness as cover. Move quickly. Cover as much distance as possible before sunrise. Reach defensible. Terrain. Maybe survive. The historian Thucydides would later write about this decision, about how desperate the Athenian generals were, about how they knew most of their men would die but chose this option anyway, because at least some might survive. Nicias and Demosthenes gave the order, prepare to march tonight. At sunset, leave the wounded who cannot walk, leave the heavy equipment, carry weapons and water, nothing else. Move silently, move quickly, do not stop for anything, do not light fires. Do not make noise that will give away your position. The order spread through the camp. Thousands of men preparing for a night march through hostile territory. Most understood they were about to die. Some hoped they might survive. All knew there was no other choice. Officers explained the plan to their units. We march inland, 40 miles. We move fast. We do not stop. If we can reach defensible ground before dawn, some of us might live. If the Syracusans catch us in open ground at sunrise, we all die. No one protested. No one suggested an alternative. Everyone understood. This was the last chance. As the sun began to set on that September day in 413 BC, the Athenian army stood ready. What remained of the 40,000 who had arrived 2 years earlier as conquerors? The generals gave the order, move out, into the darkness, into what would be one of the worst disasters in Athenian history. The march began. The first problem was noise. Tens of thousands of men trying to move silently through darkness. Impossible. Equipment rattled, armor clanged, feet scraped on rocks, men whispered orders. Others whispered back. The sound carried in the night air. The Athenians moved inland, away from the coast, away from Syracuse. following paths through unfamiliar terrain. Officers at the front trying to navigate by starlight. The column stretched for miles behind them. No torches, no fires. Orders were clear. Any light would give away their position immediately. The Syracusans were out. There, watching, waiting. The darkness was complete. No moon yet. Men stumbled over rocks, tripped on uneven ground, bumped into the soldier ahead. The formation that had started organized was already fracturing, units losing contact with each other. The wounded tried to keep up. Men with injuries from weeks of fighting, infections, broken bones that had healed poorly, exhaustion. They limped, they stumbled. Some fell and could not get up. The column moved past them, left them behind. No choice. An hour passed, maybe two. Hard to judge time in darkness. The Athenians were making progress, slow progress, but moving, putting distance between themselves and the Syracusan positions. Then someone saw lights behind them, torches, in the distance, moving. The Syracusans had discovered them. Word spread through the column, whispered frantically. They know. They're coming. Keep moving. The Syracusan scouts had been watching the Athenian camp, waiting for any movement. When tens of thousands of men started marching, the noise gave them away within the first hour. The scouts lit signal fires, alerted their commanders. The Syracusan army mobilized. You're probably thinking the Syracusans attacked immediately. They didn't. The Syracusans did not attack immediately. They followed, staying close, tracking the Athenians through the darkness, waiting for dawn. Why fight in darkness when daylight would give them every advantage? The Athenians could see the torches behind them. Dozens of torches, then hundreds. The entire Syracusan army was following, staying just out of reach, herding them. Panic started spreading through the Athenian ranks. Men looking back, seeing the lights getting closer, starting to move faster. Officers trying to maintain order, stay in formation, do not run. But the discipline was cracking. The second hour turned into the third. The Athenians were moving faster now, not marching, half running, trying to put distance between themselves and the pursuing. Torches, but running in darkness over rough terrain. Men were falling, twisting ankles, dropping equipment. The Syracusan cavalry began harassment attacks, not full charges, just riding close, firing arrows into the darkness, javelin throws, then withdrawing before the Athenians could respond. Hit and run, over and over. The arrows fell randomly. Most missed, some hit. Men screamed, went down. The column kept moving. No one stopped to help. The order was keep moving, do not stop. Stopping meant death. The formation was breaking apart completely now. What had started as an organized retreat was becoming a mob. Thousands of men stumbling through darkness, following whoever was ahead of them, hoping they were going the right direction. Units lost contact with each other. A group would veer left following a path. Another group would go right. The army was fragmenting into smaller clusters, each moving independently, each trying to survive. The wounded who had been keeping up began falling. Behind. They could not maintain the pace, could not run. The column moved past them. Some begged not to be left. Others just sat down, accepted it, waited for the Syracusans to find them. The screams from behind told the Athenians what was happening to those who fell behind. The Syracusans were not taking prisoners. Not yet. Just killing stragglers, clearing the path. By the fourth hour, the Athenian army was no longer an army. It was scattered groups of desperate men, running through darkness, being chased, being shot at, leaving trails of dead and wounded behind them. The generals tried to maintain control. Nicias and Demosthenes rode up and down what remained of the column, shouting orders, trying to keep units together. But in darkness, with thousands of panicked men, their voices were lost. Some soldiers made their own decisions. Small groups broke off, tried to hide, waited in ravines or behind rocks, hoping the Syracusans would pass them by, planning to move again when it was safer. Most of these men were found and killed. The Syracusans were thorough. They swept through the terrain, checked every hiding spot, killed everyone they found. This was not a battle. This was extermination. The main body of Athenians kept moving, pushing inland. The terrain was getting rougher. Hills, rocky ground, harder to navigate in darkness, harder to keep moving fast. But stopping was not an option. The Syracusans were all around them now, not just behind, on the flanks. Cavalry units had ridden ahead, cut off paths, blocked routes. The Athenians were being funneled, pushed in a specific direction. They did not realize it yet. Around midnight, the Athenian vanguard reached a river, small, rocky, but water. Men who had been marching without water for hours threw themselves toward it, broke ranks, ran for the riverbank, started drinking desperately. The officers screamed at them, "Keep moving. This is not a rest stop. We have to keep going." But the thirst was overwhelming. Men ignored the orders, drank, filled whatever containers they had. This delay cost them. The Syracusan forces caught up, launched attacks on the men at the river, arrows, javelins, some cavalry charges into the disorganized clusters. Men drinking were shot. Men trying to flee were run down. The chaos at the river lasted maybe 20 minutes. Then the Athenians were moving again, leaving more dead behind, leaving wounded who could not move. The column staggered forward, but the delay had cost them. They had lost time, lost distance, and the Syracusans were closer now, much closer. The eastern sky was still dark. Dawn was hours away, but the Athenians were exhausted. They had been marching and running for maybe 5 hours. No rest, no water except that brief stop at the river, no sleep in days before this. They were operating on fear and desperation. Some men simply collapsed, not wounded, just exhausted, legs giving out, bodies shutting down. They fell and could not get up. Their units moved past them, left them sitting or lying on the ground, waiting for whatever came next. The Syracusan harassment continued, constant pressure, arrows from the darkness, cavalry appearing and disappearing, never a full attack, just enough to keep the Athenians moving, keep them panicked, keep them exhausted. By the 6th hour, maybe half the Athenian force was still moving as units. The other half was scattered, lost in the darkness, hiding, dead, wounded, captured, gone. The generals had no idea how many men they still had, no way to count in the darkness, no way to know which units were still together. They just kept moving forward, hoping enough would survive to make a stand somewhere. The Syracusans knew exactly what they were doing. They were not trying to destroy the Athenians in darkness. They were exhausting them, scattering them, breaking their formation and morale. But that's not even the worst part. They were herding them toward a specific location, a place where dawn would find them trapped, exposed, with nowhere to run. The Athenians did not know this yet. They just kept moving through the darkness, exhausted, terrified, hoping to reach safety before sunrise. But the eastern sky was beginning to lighten, just barely, the first hint of dawn approaching, and they were still miles from any defensible ground. The darkness was fading, not quickly, but enough that men could start to see shapes, trees, rocks, the soldier ahead of them. This should have been relief, being able to see, but it meant the Syracusans could see them too. The Athenians had been moving for 6 hours, maybe 7. No one knew anymore. Time had become meaningless. There was only movement, one foot in front of the other. Keep going, do not stop. Men were collapsing without warning, not from wounds, from exhaustion, their bodies simply giving out, legs buckling, falling forward, lying where they fell. The column stepped over them, around them, kept moving. The thirst was worse than the exhaustion, worse than the fear. Men had not had water since that brief stop at the small river hours ago. Some had not drunk since leaving camp. Their throats were raw, lips cracked, tongues swollen. Some men drank their own urine. Others tried to find moisture in plants. Anything. The desperation for water was overwhelming everything else. The terrain was changing. They had been moving through hills, rocky ground. Now the land was sloping downward, leading into a valley. The path was funneling them, narrowing, fewer options for which direction to go. The officers noticed this. It felt wrong. They were being channeled, but there was no alternative. Going back meant running into the Syracusan army. Going sideways meant climbing steep slopes with exhausted men. Forward was the only option. Dawn was coming. The eastern sky was no longer black. It was dark blue, then lighter blue. The stars were disappearing. Shapes were becoming clearer. The world was taking form again. The Athenians could see each other now, see the devastation. Men covered in dust and blood, armor dented and broken, faces hollow with exhaustion. This was not an army anymore. These were survivors of something that had not finished yet. The Syracusan forces were visible too. On the ridges above them, cavalry units pacing them, infantry columns following, not attacking, just watching, waiting. You're probably thinking the Athenians could have formed defensive lines and fought back, but these men could barely walk. They had no formation, no organization, no strength left to fight. They could only keep moving and hope. The slope downward was getting steeper. The valley ahead was becoming visible, and at the bottom of that valley, something reflected the growing light. Water, a river, the Asinaris River, wider than the small stream they had crossed hours ago. Real water, enough for everyone. The word spread instantly. River ahead, water. The effect was immediate. Men who had been stumbling found energy, started moving faster. The pace increased, then increased again. Men began running. The officers tried to maintain order. Slow down, stay in formation. We need to cross carefully. But no one listened. The thirst overrode everything. Training, discipline, common sense, all gone. The leading elements reached the riverbank and threw themselves forward, into the water, drinking desperately, submerging their heads, gulping, choking, drinking more. The men behind them saw this and ran faster, pushing forward, thousands of men converging on the river from the slope above. No formation, no order, just a mob of desperate soldiers fighting to reach water. Now watch what happens next. The rear units were still coming down the slope. The middle sections were at the riverbank. The front sections were already in the water. The entire Athenian force was stretched along the river, completely disorganized, focused on drinking, not watching their surroundings. The Syracusan cavalry appeared on the high ground above them, not dozens, hundreds, positioned on both sides of the valley, overlooking the river. The Syracusan infantry moved into position at the valley's entrance, blocking the route the Athenians had just come through, cutting off retreat. More infantry appeared on the ridges, surrounding the valley. Archers, slingers, javelin throwers, all positioned above the Athenians at the river. The trap was perfect. The sun broke over the eastern horizon, full sunrise. The valley was flooded with light. Every Athenian soldier was visible, exposed, trapped in the riverbed below the Syracusan positions. The Athenian generals saw it immediately. They had been herded for 7 hours through the darkness, pushed exactly where the Syracusans wanted them, into this valley, against this river, with high ground all around them. Nicias tried to rally his men, get out of the river, form defensive lines, prepare for attack, but the men were scattered along the riverbank. Many still in the water, drinking, oblivious, exhausted beyond the ability to respond. Demosthenes rode along the river shouting orders, organize by unit, shield wall, protect the flanks. Some men heard, some tried to obey. Most just stayed where they were, too exhausted to move, too desperate for water to care. The Syracusans watched this chaos from above. They did not charge immediately. They took their time. Let the Athenians see the situation. Let them understand they were trapped. Let the fear build. Then the Syracusan general gave the signal. The archers fired first, hundreds of arrows from 3 sides, falling into the riverbed, into the men at the water, into the men trying to form defensive lines, into the officers on horses. Men fell, screaming, splashing into the water, arrows in backs, in legs, in necks. The river started turning red. The javelin throwers fired next, heavier projectiles, punching through armor, killing men who thought they were protected. The javelins came, in waves, coordinated, systematic. The slingers added their fire, lead shot, stones, hitting helmets, breaking bones, not always killing but disabling. Men dropped their weapons, clutched their heads, fell. The Athenians tried to raise shields, form protection, but they were scattered, disorganized, no cohesive defense, just individuals trying to survive. Some Athenians tried to fight back, archers who still had arrows. They fired upward at the Syracusan positions, but shooting uphill, at targets above them, against soldiers behind cover. The arrows did little damage. The Syracusan missile fire continued, relentless, from 3 sides. No cover for the Athenians, trapped in the open riverbed, exposed to everything. Men tried to flee, run downstream, run upstream, climb out of the valley. The Syracusan cavalry cut them down, rode them down, killed them before they got far. Others tried to surrender, threw down their weapons, raised their hands. Some were taken prisoner, some were killed. Anyway, depended on which Syracusan units reached them. The generals tried to maintain some organization. Nicias gathered men around him, formed a small defensive cluster, shields overlapping, trying to protect each other from the missiles raining down. Demosthenes did the same on another part of the riverbank. Maybe 1,000 men around him, packed tight, shields up, enduring the onslaught. But that's not even the worst part. The Syracusan infantry began descending into the valley, not charging, walking, methodically. They had all the time in the world. The Athenians were not going anywhere. The infantry reached the river, began engaging the Athenian survivors. Close combat now, sword against sword, spear against spear. But the Athenians were exhausted, dehydrated, many wounded from the missile fire. They could barely lift their weapons. The Syracusan soldiers were fresh, rested, fed, watered. They cut through the Athenian resistance systematically, killing, capturing, moving. Forward. The massacre at the river continued for hours. Not a battle, a slaughter. The Athenians had no way to escape, no energy to fight effectively, no organization to mount a defense. Small groups tried to hold positions. Officers rallied men around them, formed shield walls, fought desperately, but they were overwhelmed, isolated, destroyed one group at a time. The sun climbed higher, the heat increased. Men who had survived the arrows and javelins and swords were dying of thirst and heat, lying wounded in the riverbed, unable to reach the water, watching others die around them. By mid-morning, the fighting was mostly over. Thousands of Athenians dead, bodies floating in the river, bodies covering the riverbank, bodies piled where defensive stands had been made. The survivors surrendered, maybe 6,000, maybe 7,000, throwing down their weapons, raising their hands, begging for mercy. The Syracusan soldiers rounded them up, bound their hands, marched them away from the river, away from the carnage. The prisoners stumbled forward, defeated, broken. The generals surrendered separately. Nicias and Demosthenes, brought before the Syracusan commanders, offered to negotiate, offered ransom, offered anything. The Syracusan commanders refused. These men had besieged Syracuse for 2 years, killed thousands of Syracusans, destroyed farms and villages. There would be no negotiation. The generals were taken away under guard. Their fate would be decided later. The Athenian army that had sailed to Sicily 2 years earlier with 40,000 men was destroyed. Some killed in the siege, some killed during the retreat, some killed at the river, a few thousand prisoners, a few hundred scattered and hiding. One night, one failed retreat, one river, the end of Athenian supremacy. The prisoners were marched to Syracuse, 7,000 men, maybe more, hands bound, guarded by Syracusan soldiers. The march took hours. Men collapsed from exhaustion, from dehydration, from wounds. They were left where they fell. The survivors reached Syracuse by evening, the city that Athens had tried to conquer for 2 years. Now Athenian soldiers were being paraded through its streets. The citizens came out to watch. Some shouted, some threw things, most just stared. The Syracusans had prepared a place for the prisoners. Stone quarries outside the city, deep pits carved into limestone, used for mining stone to build Syracuse's walls and buildings. Now they would hold prisoners. The Athenians were thrown into the quarries, hundreds at a time, dropped into pits 20 feet deep. No ladders, no way to climb out. Guards positioned above, watching, making sure no one escaped. The conditions were immediately terrible. No shelter. The quarries were open to the sky. During the day, the sun beat down. The stone reflected heat. Men baked. At night, the temperature dropped. The stone was cold. Men froze. No water was provided initially. The prisoners drank what little rainwater collected in cracks in the stone. It was not enough. Men died of thirst within days. Food came irregularly. Scraps. Not enough to sustain thousands of men. Starvation set in quickly. The wounded died first, then the sick, then the weak. Disease spread rapidly. Thousands of men packed into confined spaces. No sanitation, no medical care. Dysentery, fever, infections from untreated wounds. The death toll climbed. Bodies were left in the quarries. No one removed them. The prisoners lived among their dead. The smell was overwhelming. The conditions inhuman. You're probably thinking the Syracusans planned to ransom them or sell them as slaves. Some were, but most died in the quarries first. Weeks passed. The population in the quarries shrank. 7,000 became 6,000, then 5,000, then fewer. Men died every day, every night. The strongest tried to survive. Most failed. A few prisoners were pulled out, sold as slaves, sent to work farms or mines elsewhere. Some were kept by Syracusan families as household slaves. But these were the lucky ones, the exception. The Athenian generals faced a different fate. Nicias and Demosthenes were held separately, not in the quarries, in actual prisons. They were valuable prisoners, high-ranking. The Syracusans debated what to do with them. Nicias had been against the invasion from the start. He had argued in Athens that Sicily was too ambitious, too dangerous. He had been overruled, sent anyway as commander. Now he tried to use this to negotiate, offered to testify that this war had been a mistake, offered cooperation. The Syracusans were not interested. These men had besieged their city for 2 years. Thousands of Syracusans had died. Farms had been destroyed. The economy damaged. There would be no mercy. Both generals were executed. The exact method varies in historical accounts, but the result was certain: dead. Their bodies were not returned to Athens. No honorable burial, just death in a foreign land. The news reached Athens weeks later. Ships from Sicily brought survivors, a few hundred men who had escaped the massacre, who had hidden and made their way to friendly ports, who had been ransomed early before the full disaster was known. They told Athens what had happened: the naval defeat, the retreat, the river, the massacre, the quarries. Athens was in shock, complete shock. The largest expedition in their history, the pride of their navy, 40,000 men, gone. The assembly met immediately. Emergency session. Chaos. Some leaders called for continuing the war, sending reinforcements to Sicily, avenging the dead. Others called for peace, negotiations, survival. The practical reality was obvious. Athens had lost its fleet, lost 40,000 men, lost the wealth spent on the expedition. The treasury was nearly empty. The military was devastated. Allied cities were watching for weakness. Athens would continue fighting. They built new ships, conscripted new soldiers, raised emergency taxes, melted down temple gold to fund the war effort. They refused to surrender, refused to accept that Syracuse had broken them. But the momentum was gone. The allies were watching, the enemies were circling. The disaster in Sicily had exposed Athenian vulnerability, shown that Athens could be beaten, destroyed completely. Syracuse marked the beginning of the end for Athenian supremacy. Not the immediate end, but the turning point. Within months, Athenian allies began rebelling. Sparta renewed attacks with fresh confidence. Persia entered the war backing Athens' enemies with money and ships. The empire started fracturing. 9 years later, Athens would surrender. How that collapse happened is a story for another time. All of this, the collapse, the defeat, the end of the empire, could have been prevented. It had been avoidable, completely avoidable. Athens did not need to invade Sicily. Syracuse was not threatening Athens. The invasion was pure ambition, expansion. For the sake of expansion, the assembly had voted for glory and wealth and empire. Voices had warned against it, argued it was too risky, too far, too ambitious. They were overruled, ignored, silenced by leaders promising easy victory. The commanders knew the risks. Nicias had argued against the expedition from the start, but he went anyway, followed orders, tried to win an unwinnable war, and died for it. The tactical decisions compounded the disaster. 2 years besieging one city, the naval battle in confined waters, the decision to retreat at night through hostile territory. Each decision seemed reasonable at the time. Each decision led deeper into catastrophe. The final mistake was at the river. Desperation for water overrode everything. Discipline, training, common sense. Men abandoned formation, ran to drink, made themselves vulnerable. The Syracusans exploited it perfectly. 7,000 men entered the stone quarries at Syracuse. After months, maybe a few hundred were still alive. The rest died there, in pits, far from home, forgotten. One invasion, one city, 2 years, one night, one river, the worst military disaster in Athenian history. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment. Would you have voted for the invasion? Or would you have been one of the voices saying no? Subscribe and turn on notifications if you want more stories like this.